Hi, everyone. We'll give it just another minute or so, and then we'll be getting started here. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining this event today. We're all really excited to be here. My name is Louise Brugulio. I lead product and engineering at Andros, and I'll be the moderator today. So my job is just to facilitate the conversation between this really awesome group of people. First of all, this is part of actually a series of four different events. And we've created this, we're calling it the CNO Roundtable. The reason we've created this event is because we see a growing role in the Chief Network Officer. It's a strategic role. And what we're starting to see, and perhaps some of you are seeing this as well, is that Chief Network Officers are really leading transformation in healthcare and through network-driven strategies. So remembering that the network is really at the center of often their organizations, it's often at the center of their patient and member experiences. So the goal of these events is to highlight these leadership insights, a forum where we can talk about collaboration, we can talk about patient-centered strategies, and where we can also cover some real-world innovations that are happening out in the market. This again is the first of a four-part series, so we hope that you enjoyed today, and we certainly hope that you come back next week and the weeks after for the rest of the series. Couple of quick housekeeping items before I jump in. Zoom logistics. So you will see on your screen there is a QA feature. Should be toward the bottom of your screen if you don't see it. Would encourage you as you're listening, question pops into your head, go ahead and put it right in that chat panel. We won't pause to answer it, but we absolutely will get to them at the end. So go ahead and throw it in as it comes to you. Today, our topic is leading the shift, how Chief Network Officers drive organizational transformation. I'm really excited to have these three panelists on the call with me today. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll dive right in there. I'll pass it over for introductions, starting with Keely.
All right. Thanks so much, Louise. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Keely Gladio. I'm currently the Chief Operating Officer for Optum Health Networks. I've been in healthcare my entire career, starting on the provider side of the business, working in the managed care space with the Detroit Medical Center. And then for the last 15 years, I have been with United Health Group in varying capacities, all within the network space. Everything from leading local markets to leading provider relationship teams, operations teams, performance management teams, government program teams, and now end to end all of our network operations on the Optum side of our business. You know, what excites me about this topic is I've spent my entire career trying to figure out and solve for the challenges that exist inside of the network space. And you know, while we've all done great work in this industry, there is so much more work to be done. And so I'm excited to talk to all of you today and my fellow panel members here and discuss, you know, what's the future of a network organization? What's the future of a CNO role? And so that's what excites me about this. A little fun fact about myself. I like to do things in pairs. So I have 2 kids, 2 dogs, and 2 cats at home.
That's great.
And
Very
I'll turn it over to
symmetrical.
Rob.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Robert Termako. I'm the Senior Vice President of Network Strategy and Operations at WellSense Health Plan. We're a nonprofit health plan serving Medicare, individual, family, and Medicaid plan members in both the states of Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Prior to joining WellSense, I've served in a number of network roles as well, Harvard Pilgrim Health Care, Fallon Health, Great West Life, now Cigna Healthcare. So I've been doing this about 30 years, all on the payer side. So I've seen a lot of changes over the year. Excited for the directions and, you know, the next generation of contracting and networking and provider experience. So look forward to the discussion today. And fun fact, my birthday is May 6th. So 50 years old today.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
And then Jeff.
Gosh, my birthday is next Sunday on Mother's Day, Rob.
Oh, happy birthday, sir. Taurus. All right.
Yeah, exactly. So Jeff Fritz, I am the CEO of Andros. It's a pleasure to be with this crew. This is really fun for me. Andros, we work in the broad space called the Network Lifecycle Platform, and so every payer and every provider organization has some sort of a network lifecycle platform that they run. Some are super disjointed with lots of point solutions that don't really work well together. Others are getting more knitted together so that they can manage that life cycle of what their network should be doing to perform against the product initiatives that they have. So we kind of sit right in the middle of that conversation. We're a boutique consultancy and a platform as a service organization. So trying to connect everything from design, how you design a network, to how you build a network and how you manage your network. Fun fact about me, geez, I'm a Minnesota native, but I love the winter. So when I go away for winter, a lot of people go to Florida and watch the beach, or Arizona, and I end up in the mountains skiing. So I'm kind of a snow junkie.
Glutton for the cold.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'm super excited to have you here again. Let's go ahead and just start diving into the content. So first, I'm going to pass this to you to answer first, Keely, and then Rob would like to hear from you as well. Would love to hear a little bit about this role of Chief Network Officer. So, right, that is kind of the thesis behind this series. We're trying to create a forum for Chief Network Officers to discuss. As we've been talking to folks about that idea and that role, they've said, well, that's not my title often, right? I sit over here in ops, or I sit over here. But the more we talk about the need and what's happening, people say, hey, I think that's actually my job. That may not be my title. And so we are starting to see, though, this title of Chief Network Officer. We're starting to see people in this role. Their job is often to bridge strategy and execution. Would love to hear from you guys. What is it signaling that we are starting to see this role of Chief Network Officer? What is that telling us about the industry? Over to you first, Keely.
Great question, Louise. And I think Rob and I were joking when we were prepping for this event that I think we both just got new jobs with this forum.
Yeah. I don't know if it's a promotion or just an increase of
I don't
responsibility.
know. But what I would say is, today and historically, every payer, every provider, every health technology organization has done things independently. So think about independent contracting, independent maintenance of those contracts, independent provider data acquisition, independent network research that enables the things that matter most, which is payments for services after they've been rendered to patients. And so if you think about an environment, if you think about the healthcare industry where everyone is managing those functions independently, you automatically understand, and you've seen this transition over the years, that the industry has to evolve. And it has to evolve because the variability of best practices in all of those independent functions and the performance inside of each of those independent functions, the methods around payments, the implications to payments, the implications to predictable financial models, those all go downstream in each of those variable components. And so I would say, is it born out of necessity or is it due? My answer to that is it's both. First and foremost, it's overdue for providers. I believe that payers have an obligation to providers who are requiring them to do this, to create things like singular contracting vocabulary, things like risk program offerings that can be scaled multi-payer, things like centralized processes for onboarding, for data management, more consistent customer service. These are the things that if you were to go and talk to providers, that are the common themes that we hear on a regular basis. So I think that this role is overdue for what we've heard from the provider community. But I think it was also born out of necessity. And the necessity is coming from the market demands. And those market demands are not just providers, they're consumers. And if you think about the market demands on a network, the market demands are simplicity, consistency. They are simpler access, simpler solutions, those guideposts that really give the consumer of healthcare services stability. We also see, not just in the healthcare industry, but in the US and globally, we see the market demanding things like automation. We see them demanding best in class tools. And we also see the global demand for speed and quality. So all of those things are contributing to, this role used to sit inside of a tech organization, or it could sit inside of an ops organization. You would have the COO leading a network. You would have the CTO leading the network. And now you see organizations stepping back and saying, because of all of these things and these demands and requirements of the industry and global, that you have to have a chief network officer. It's a critical phase right now.
Yeah, I love that. You touched on a lot of really important points there. I like the trends that you're seeing and the reminder that this is about consumer demand too, right? In order to deliver on that consumer demand, we have to better connect strategy, execution, and the whole life cycle. How about from your perspective, Rob? Why do you think that this role is starting to emerge? What's changed or what needs to change?
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what, Keely and Jeff were saying. One of the things that resonated with me with Jeff is, on the network side. So we have this technology and very disparate technology. And one of the things we're trying to do is create this provider experience, right? So we're looking at, everyone's looking at provider journey, provider experience. The providers are an important part, right, to providing, appropriate care to our members and providing, a better outcomes. And so, we struggle with the network area. I think I've seen very disjointed systems and there's not good connectivity end to end and through. So we're looking, and there's a lot of, entities out there with these provider lifecycle management systems. And, as a network person, you're trying to filter through all of these and determine, what is the best solution that you can bring together to provide that best in class experience. And then similarly on the people side of it as well, again, Keely, I think we're joking is, I've reported to 5 different people throughout my career, different C-suite people, and not only even in just the network, which would be the traditional contracting, but the operational pieces that go along with it have been kind of separated. So I think there is this trend where you are bringing back not only just the network, the contracting piece of it, but the credentialing, the provider data maintenance. You're bringing together analysts, network adequacy, all of this stuff there to provide this end to end. So I think it's critical to have this, this position in place because you need somebody kind of at the top, making sure that this stuff is all running seamlessly through.
Awesome. And that's actually a great transition into a question that I have coming for you, Jeff. So you've been a CEO of several companies. I won't name how many because I don't want anybody to date you or age you. But right, I know as a CEO, you think a little bit about organizations and how they're designed. As we think about this role and Chief Network Officer and really what Rob and Keely are saying, right? We want to bring together strategy and operations. We want to really kind of nurture and create more accountability over that full provider life cycle. How do you think organizations should be rethinking their team structures, their stakeholder alignment, how this role interacts with other folks within the organization?
Well, I think it's when I look historically at the roles that Keely and Rob are talking about with the operational effectiveness, the patient safety, governance, risk and compliance, credentialing, all of those things that are big pieces of operating a network. I think what I'm seeing elevate and where I would want to, if I were on the leadership team, the senior leadership team of a plan, I would want somebody at the table is the strategic value of the network. The network is so important to the success of this products. We're seeing it today. We're seeing, we were talking as we were getting on this call, companies that are pulling out of certain business lines, and a big reason why they're pulling out is they can't perform to the thesis of what the product was put together to do. And so that delivery of the product promise, a cornerstone of that is the network of providers that you've put into play to meet the needs of the subscribers or members that you bring into that product set. So this new idea of tailoring networks to products is not a one and done thing. It is a constant thing, and it is really a tuning thing that you need that strategic network thinker at the table, alongside the finance leader, alongside the sales leader of the organization, to really make things go.
Yeah, I love that statement of the network in many ways as the product promise, right? It's the thing that fulfills, right, the commitment to the membership or the patient population. I'm wondering if there's any inspiration we can get, Jeff. Like, have we seen this play before in other industries? Does it feel to you anything like a CIO or a transformation officer or an experience officer? Do you think there's things we can learn?
Yeah, I think that the experience officer is a really good one where a lot of companies were looking around at their delivery of their product promise, and they found that they were cobbling together this notion of what Rob was calling a provider journey or even a patient journey. And that kind of borne out this new role called a chief experience officer that was cutting across a lot of the organization to make sure the touch points along the way were of higher quality to deliver on this promise. So in that quadruple aim, we keep coming back to the quadruple aim: cost, quality, member experience, provider experience. We have experience in two of those four things. And so I think this chief network officer is a similar idea of how do you improve the quadruple aim delivery promise, similar to a chief experience officer.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. Another thing I'm wondering if we can touch on, Keely, this was something that you brought up a bit in our prep call, and I thought it was a really kind of interesting thing to hear a bit more on. You talked a little bit about how really ownership of network and ownership of network design has shifted, right? For a while, it was payer and total payer domain. Now we've got IPAs, we've got MSOs, we've got provider groups, we've got right, some private equity dollars flowing into provider groups in new ways, and it feels like that's all changing the landscape. What do you see? What do you see there, and what do you think is influencing the world of network?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, if you just look across the portfolio of healthcare businesses today, I mean, it's so diversified in comparison to 10 years ago, even. And one of the most common and the most critical foundational requirements of that change has been the success of a network of care providers, right? You don't have a healthcare industry if you don't have a network of healthcare providers. But what you're seeing is you now see provider groups who, in some ways, are dissatisfied with what I'll call the archaic payer solution to a network of care providers. You know, you think of the old just HMO PPO world. They're approaching this and saying, we can design and we can standardize our own consistent network and our own consistent operations models, and we can partner with payers instead of just being a part of their network that they're designing. We have a voice and we can sit at the table and we can construct this alongside them. So you see this shift from this almost siloed approach to network where it's really payer driven, payer designed, to this integrated approach where it's payer provider partnership. And you actually see providers becoming payers. You see payers becoming providers. And so this new market entrant is what I'll call it. So all of these providers getting into the payer space and payers getting into the provider space are really new market entrants, are aligning on support functions. And they're aligning on those support functions that do a couple of things. They're reducing duplication. They're driving scale. They're driving value to cost. They're calibrating and pacing the healthcare industry in a way that it's never been calibrated and paced before. So in a partnership model where you have IPAs, MSOs, and provider groups engaging in the design and the construct of a network organization, you're almost shifting those accountabilities to where, hey, the payer doesn't need to do provider data management. The accountability is shifting to the providers, and the providers are now going to do their own provider data management and feed it into the payer systems. You see the shift of, hey, I don't actually have to go out and create tailored networks as a payer. I can go out and partner with provider groups who want to create their own network, and then I can contract with that entity instead. And so this redesign of these, you know, where is the value, where does it reside, is shifting, and it's not solely landing with payers anymore. It's solely landing with payers partnering with providers.
Yeah, I love that. I also, when you were speaking, you said it's changed a lot in the last 10 years, and
Oh yeah.
that's an exciting frame of reference because I feel like 10 years in healthcare is an eye blink. You know what I mean? It's like usually we say it goes 15, 20 years, but you're right, this landscape is shifting in a relatively short period of time, really, really dramatically. I'd like to talk a little bit, and Rob, I'll send this question to you, and then Jeff, I'd like to see if you have some follow-up as well. Um, you mentioned, Rob, that whole provider life cycle kind of end to end. It certainly can start with contracting, recruiting, but it probably even starts before that, right? When you're thinking about, should I even go into this market? There's a strategy component. Then there's doing the work of recruiting and contracting, and then there's certainly onboarding and credentialing, and then there's performance management and risk management. So I won't name them all, but when you think of that kind of full end to end, are there pieces in your mind that could really be more tightly integrated, or pieces where you think there could be big unlocks if we can find a way to align them better, get better performance out of steps of that life cycle?
I think again, with the advent of the chief network officer, having kind of a seat at that table at that C-suite executive, I think they're going to bring great insight into into the markets, into the product lines, and working with the product and the business development folks to kind of understand what those opportunities are. I think sometimes historically decisions have been kind of siloed, and it's kind of, cart before the horse. And the network team is just kind of reacting to some of the decisions that had already been made. And so by having at the seat of the table, it's an advantage for everyone, because now network can come in and we have an understanding of the market. We know who the providers are. We know what's palatable. We know what will be needed in terms of network design, what will be attractive to membership. So I think at the outset, being involved in those decisions early on, that's like the earliest part of the provider life cycle. And then you begin designing your network, looking at the providers who should be in there. Are you doing a limited network? Is it a tiered network? What is the best play for this particular product and business line that you're entering in? And then, the contracting piece, it's important, but it's such a small part of it. And when you're talking about the provider life cycle, there's just so much more. And as Keely was indicating, the relationships are even changing, where providers have a seat at the table. We have these ACOs where they're basically joint ventures, and they're sitting on these boards. The providers are helping to drive those decisions. So even the support structure from the plan and specifically network and what we're doing, our roles are changing, the delegation, the oversight. So the infrastructure that's needed to support all this has changed greatly. And again, it's all goes back and ties into this kind of overall provider experience. If you're not delivering that provider experience from end to end, you're credentialing them on time, you're getting them loaded, they're paying their claims accurately and timely, you're delivering them timely data that they can digest related to their value-based networks. They're making decisions on their end as to who they want to partner with and who they want to enter into these types of ventures. So if you're not performing at a high level and you have these systems all tightly integrated, you're at a disadvantage.
Yeah, I love that. Couple of really good reminders in there, right? You're spending more minutes, hours, days, months outside of contracting with your provider partners than you are in. So how do you make the most of that time? That's a really great reminder. I love also the call to action to shift from being reactive to proactive. It's really important. Jeff, how about you?
Yeah, to add to Rob's answer, we're just seeing a lot more around um, what we call transformation. Like there's existing structures in place, and rather than rest on those structures and manage those structures and just look for cheaper ways to deliver on the existing structures, we're seeing a lot more conversations around how do we transform our structures. To Keely's point around the partnerships, it's turning it more into a federation of network capabilities that need to work really well together. And to Rob's point, we're seeing a federation of capabilities to deliver on the product promise. And then I think a lot about technology, having the ability to orchestrate data and workflows across multiple systems. There's no one ring to rule them all. You got to find this piping and plumbing in order to unlock the potential of the different systems that need to work better together in a fairly disjointed sector of healthcare.
I think that's great. And yeah, we started with Rob by talking about how do we better align the steps of the life cycle and maximize them. Jeff, in part of your response, I hear you saying there's also an opportunity to almost align the layers of the life cycle. How do I
Yeah,
align strategy to the process, to the people, to the technology?
exactly.
And I think that's a great segue too, because during our prep session, we had a lively conversation about data, which some people in the audience are probably thinking that's oxymoron. How do you have lively conversations about data? But we were really talking as we were talking about kind of the future and what we wish were true and what isn't true. We end up talking a little bit about data. So right, provider data is a really essential component of achieving this vision. It's also still a major hurdle. So, Keely, I'm going to pass this one to you. Are we still struggling with data? If we are, why are we still struggling with data? And are there any opportunities for this kind of new approach to network to solve some of those problems?
If we weren't struggling with data, we'd all be retired right now. But I'll tell you, I love talking about provider data. I feel like I've spent my entire career talking about provider data. It energizes me with great enthusiasm. So, um, provider data. So I think literally everyone that sits in any healthcare capacity will agree that provider data is just foundational to the healthcare system working. And so you ask me, do we still have issues or is it fixed? It's not. We still have issues. But at the core root of all of it, provider data, it guides our decision making. It helps our patients access their care. And it keeps all of regardless of what part of the industry we're working in, it keeps all of our operations running smoothly behind the scenes. So I think everyone on this call would acknowledge that the challenges of keeping provider data up to date and error free, especially with all of the changes that are happening, frequent changes is in practice locations, changes in credentials, changes in participation in different networks. Those issues that we see have persisted for a multitude of reasons, and they continue to persist. And no one can ignore that. And really, when you think about, well, why? Why do they persist? Why am I, 2 decades into my career and still haven't solved for this? Why are any of us still sitting at the table having these conversations? And the reality of it is, there's about 4 components that you could really attribute these current challenges and these historic challenges to. And one of them is availability. Data availability historically was a challenge because it wasn't available, right? It was getting sourced, like grassroots sourcing. But now I actually think data availability, one of our challenges is it's too available. And keep up with the pace in which data is becoming available and keep that accurate has now become our ongoing challenge. So in the past where we didn't have the data, now we have too much data, and keeping it accurate, it just is running inconsistent and it's outdating itself as quickly as we're updating it. The second reason is, and still not solved for, is there is no, in the healthcare industry today, there is no single systematic source of provider data. We have large groups that are trying to tackle this root cause for our data challenges, but there is no single systematic source of truth for provider data today in the healthcare industry. And then third is a lot of the data sourcing that still occurs today, even as sophisticated as we are, even with all of the data information that's available to us, is most of our provider data today is still manually collected. It's still aggregated manually. It's still distributed manually. And all of those manual processes that still exist organically inside of all of our organizations are susceptible to human error. We've come a long way with AI. We've come a long way with data technology advancements. But the reality of it is, if I change my phone number or I change my address or I change where I'm practicing, unless I tell someone that I've done that, the data can't be updated, right? And the same holds true on the payer side, right? If we change our tax ID numbers, if we start operating under a different legal entity, unless we notify people that we've done that, the data can't be updated accordingly. And then the last piece is we have duplicate records that exist in our systems inside of, even if you were to Google someone, there's duplicate records. But in addition to duplicate records is the opposite side of that spectrum, which is data fragmentation, where you have a record, but let's say it says 123 Main, but it's really 123 Main Street. On a claim coming in, that causes data fragmentation issues from it being manually or auto adjudicated. So you have these almost like two ends of the spectrum where we have so much data that we're duplicating ourselves, but at the other end of the spectrum, you don't have the right data, so it's fragmented. And so I think those are the four areas where, we're all working to solve it. We work every day to get it right. We've come a long way, but those four key areas still exist.
Yeah, I think you're spot on that. Rob, how about you? Have you solved the provider data problem?
Yeah, I would love to say that we have, but no. I had somebody early on, a mentor in my career, say, our provider directory is what we sell. That's what we're selling is our provider directory. And so, we're only as good as our provider directory. But, as Keely pointed out, it's still the same challenges. I keep seeing the requirements for provider data. We're kind of loading things as far as cultural preferences, the level of granularity of provider data that we're now being requested. It just keeps getting greater and greater. But yet I can't even accurately track whether panels are open, closed, right? And so there are folks who are doing good work trying to collect the data, but it's only as good as they receive it. And there could be the 5 of us, 6 of us on this call, calling out to the office, and we might get different answers there. So it's a challenge, and that's why at least in the 30 years I've been doing this, it's the same challenges that we've had from the beginning. I think there's been a lot of good work. We're starting to kind of experiment with AI and pulling in different data sources for an algorithm. But as Keely said, I think there's a lot of data that's readily available, but I don't know that there's a perfect source or a great source of truth out there. So it is a constant battle, and a lot of it is just kind of do you sub this out to a vendor who's going to provide you the data? Do we hire a call team, an army of folks to call daily? Like these are the things, conversations that we're having on a daily basis that as a plan we still struggle with, but I think across the industry.
Yeah, definitely. And there's definitely more complexity in healthcare, but I can also say, from my perspective, it's a problem that a lot of businesses have faced, that especially what you talked about, Keely, that kind of overabundance of data. You saw things like that in retail when they started to go omni-channel and we're getting these waves of kind of consumer data in. And maybe part of it's too, we always want to make our data better, but maybe part of it is also just figuring out what's good enough that you can start to make better business decisions too. So, in fact, Keely, back to you kind of for wrap up on this particular topic. We talked a little bit about some of the technical challenges with data. I'm wondering, is there also a strategic challenge or maybe a strategic opportunity to kind of elevate the thinking around how data is used in the business? Is that an opportunity that relates to the chief network officer role and opportunity?
I think it is because, oftentimes provider data and the challenges associated with provider data are given to tech teams. They're given to our chief technology officers and say, go solve for this. All we need is technology. And they go and they solution, and most always that solution comes back in some form packaged with a nice bow on it. And it says, we'll solve all of our provider data challenges with interoperability and data sharing amongst our systems. That's what we always hear, right? That's the solution to provider data. But what continues to persist is that the data that's being exchanged lacks that quality and accuracy. So all you're doing is you're taking bad data, you're putting it into a new shiny system that you set on the shelf and everybody wants it, but you're taking the old data, which isn't quality data, nor is it accurate data, and putting it into the new system. So you're still going to get bad data back out.
Yeah.
So I think moving these types of challenges from like a CTO capacity and starting these challenges and having those roles be a strategic role versus a technical role, sitting under the guidance and the leadership of a chief network officer, it affords organizations the ability to, before you get to the tech, to establish clear roles, clear responsibilities for data management, clear roles and clear responsibilities for the oversight of that data, and then also clear roles and responsibilities inside of an organization for the quality and the compliance of that data. If you don't hit the management, the oversight, the quality, and the compliance, it doesn't matter what system that data sits in. And so, I always go back to, Rob, I like where you're referencing, what you've been told and what you've learned across the years. I had a mentor of mine say to me, the 7 most expensive words in business is we've always done it that way. So I go back to, my entire career, provider data has been a problem. And we've always done it one way, which is trying to let the technology solve for the problem. And I don't think it is. I think it's a strategic oversight that needs to occur in order to really solve these challenges.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think giving the kind of business side of the organization more oversight of, or at the very least, influence of, right, that
Yeah.
sort of data mandate is hugely helpful, right? Because you know the why, you know how it's going to be used and where it's going to be used, and so that feels really key. So let's go ahead and move on to a new topic. Let's actually talk a little bit. Let's go back to sort of the population. So let's think population of providers and population on members. Jeff, I think I'll pass this one to you first, and then Rob would like to hear some follow-up from you. So rapid population change, right? You know, on the provider side, we talk about aging providers. We talk about this big sort of retirement bubble that's coming our way. And certainly as well on the consumer, the sort of member patient side, you have a lot of demographic changes, you have a lot of experience changes. Do you have any examples of how organizations are thinking about these changes and how they're thinking their network strategies and the networks themselves may need to change?
Not for me.
Yeah, you first, Jeff.
Yeah, so responsiveness is really important here. So all the technology and things that we were just talking about apply. Um, when you look out and you see the the just cascade of impacts from the demographics changes that are happening. They say demographics is destiny. We are in a place where these demographics are shifting so fast and so high from not just the aging member, but the movement of the populations across state lines from northern states to southern states, from urban to rural. That those things are just clashing against each other from a supply and demand standpoint. What are the patients and members, what are they demanding, and how are those movements and demographics, not just aging but actual physical movement of people, how are those impacting the ability to supply those demands? So some of the things that I think we can take from other industries is, are there alternate sources of supply? Um, I was just in a conversation with somebody who's using dental for some primary care, um, shoring up some primary care capabilities. So how do you leverage, dentistry, which is a little bit more of a consistent delivery system for healthcare. People often go to their dentist more predictably than they do to go to see their doctor from an annual physical standpoint. Are there things they can check off? Are there alternate physical fitness or nutrition or other care provider organizations that are below the credentialing licensure that allows those that are licensed and credentialed to practice a little bit higher level of their licensure? These are the conversations that I think are really interesting when you think about what is the capital and network of capabilities that are available in the supply, and how can we maybe differently map the supply to the changing demands of the demographics.
Yeah. Rob, how about from your perspective? How are you guys thinking about keeping up with this change Jeff is describing?
Yeah, so I think on our end, obviously we're out constantly curating our network, looking at the needs, the preferences of our networks, the lines of business we're in. And one of the things that has changed, obviously, there's a PCP shortage, right? And there's PCP shortage across the board. So, we're looking at things and like, how do we fill in with telehealth services? How do we augment our network with a shortage of PCPs? In some cases we're working with now, you're seeing with like nurse practitioners and physician assistants, aggregators of those providers. And so now we're working with some of those aggregators there, to kind of fill in gaps in our networks in these rural parts of states that we operate in. So we're looking at it from that perspective, that lens. And then also, the I'll say quote unquote providers, but we're dealing with like whether it's home modifications or general contractors. We're looking at, we're working with farmers markets and growers of foods for different business lines, and network is contracting with a whole host of providers that we would have never seen, 15, 20 years ago, in order to meet the needs. And in some cases with some of these provider types and depending on the line of business, we're doing value-based or risk-based contracts with, these non-traditional provider types as well. So, that's how we're have to kind of shift and pivot kind of on the fly and to kind of make up for some of the lack of resources in these other areas.
I love that innovation, right? That the idea of, risk-based contracts with non-traditional providers. You guys are getting out there. That's great to hear about that. Um, so let's talk a little bit too about in this new world order, which, as Rob is describing, is very different. Performance looks very different. Let's actually talk a little bit more about that. So what kind of metrics should we be using to kind of measure network performance and network success? Rob, since you were just kind of talking about that, I'll pass that one to you.
So obviously, the baseline I'd say or table stakes is network adequacy. So we're looking at network adequacy, but at this point, network adequacy is just kind of the bare minimum. We need marketability and we need to be competitive. So, there's a number of sources that we're looking at in order to ensure, that we're competitive in our market and that we're meeting the needs of our members. Like I said, we're looking at things such as cultural preferences, the demographics of our membership, and we're taking that data from multiple areas within the organization and synthesizing it, which is not always, easy, and there isn't a good system or solution for that. So, we're taking that in from customer service, member appeals, from sales, we're getting it in from very disparate sources and having to pull that together. But again, we have a number of access. We put dashboards together as far as like operational metrics. What does our network look like? Where is our membership? Where is our population growing? Which areas do we want to grow in? And that's where I think this chief network officer, again, dovetails nicely, because we're pulling this information in and we're able to take that information back up to leadership and kind of help them to figure out where they should go and hunt, right? Based upon the network and some of the changes that we're seeing there. And again, I think where the metrics are also changing is going back to that provider experience and kind of really monitoring, some of the old mainstays, such as, your credentialing turnaround times, your claims payments, looking at, am I able to deliver the reports that go along with value-based contracts, right? We have a whole slew of value-based contracts, all up and down kind of the spectrum of value-based contracting, and each agreement is different, and the providers' needs are different, and we need to meet them where they're at. And so some providers are getting a whole list of reports and some are getting a more scaled down version of those reports. Are we able to deliver them timely? Are we able to deliver them in an efficient manner? And are we able to work with them and kind of performance manage and synthesize all of that? So I think there's a lot of metrics, throughout network. There's kind of the data, the operational pieces that we need to kind of stay steady on. So we're ensuring that they have the best experience. And then there's also the contract and the performance, all the traditional, the unit cost, the utilization, making sure that, we're meeting all the benchmarks. And, there's a lot of work that goes into that. And, as Keely pointed out with the data, you can have the best software solution. I hear from a number of software vendors and they want to kind of manage your value-based contracts. But if you don't have the data set up and you don't have your business rules established up front, attribution methodology, I've been at organizations where we've implemented, software solutions, upwards of $500,000, and we couldn't use it because we didn't have our own in-house data, set up or aggregated in a way that we could actually, leverage the system. So, metrics are key, and I think they are, and I think the organizations have come a long way over I'd say the past 10 years, is what I've seen. I think we'll continue to kind of move forward.
That's great. I'm going to go ahead and I think we'll do one more question that I have for the panelists, and then we'll go ahead and move to Q&A because we do have some questions that have come in. You guys have been talking about this all throughout, but I feel like I want to let the sort of last question, last topic just explicitly hit the idea of provider experience. And I think, Rob, I'm going back to kind of what you said. It's like, let's think about that provider experience, that long period of time, right, between contracting and, they're doing business with us, before, hopefully they never churn, but before they churn, right, there's a lot of time there to spend on provider experience, to spend on performance management. You even alluded to a little bit, it sounds like you're giving your providers reports. I would guess those are performance reports, but I don't really know. What do you think that plans can be doing to really improve provider experience and to kind of reshape that relationship into being one that's really maybe about shared performance?
That one for me, Luis?
Yeah, sorry, Rob, that one was for
Yeah.
you.
So I think, one of the things, we're trying to do is, and I think a lot of organizations, they're investing, resources into this is kind of, I would say it's kind of a next step up from what I would say is, provider relations, right? So we have provider relations, teams that have gone out traditionally, they've done the orientations, the trainings, the educations. They deal with a lot of the operational, issues kind of reactively as those issues come in. But now I think you're seeing many plans, they have in place provider engagement, provider performance teams that are being put in place to kind of manage this end-to-end life cycle and to ensure, that the providers are getting, a good experience. And I think, especially with the value-based contracting, there's a need to have, a high level or a high focus on managing the performance of these agreements. And again, and they cross in many various ways. You're not just looking at the financial performance, but you're looking at how you're delegating whatever services that you're delegating out to these providers and managing them, helping them, filling in the gaps where they need assistance. And again, that goes back to, do you have a system in place? Do you have reporting that can kind of help identify and show those areas of opportunity to the providers? So I really think that having that higher level of engagement and provider performance management at a higher level is going to be critical to managing these relationships. And again, the provider partners for many business lines, they're a great referral source. And so, we're working with them in these performance teams. They're almost an extension of the business development and the sales teams. They provide that insight into the organization, and they're laddering our organizations at a number of different levels. So, I really think, like, as far as the provider experience goes, having that particular core foundational piece in place is going to be critical to the success of health plans' ability to grow.
That's a fantastic point. And I love those kind of dynamic effects you're seeing where they're almost an extension of your biz dev. That's great. Keely, anything else you want to add on this topic?
I'll just round it out by saying, when you think about the provider experience, it's really a journey. And oftentimes we think that journey is linear, but it's circular. And, it begins, I guess you could say it begins in that whole onboarding phase, but most people attach onboarding to, are they credentialed? Did they sign their contract? And they think of network in those finite terms. The reality of it is, though, a provider's first experience with a payer or with any business entity that they're entering into a relationship with includes things like understanding who we are, right? Understanding, what training do I need to navigate this new business relationship that I have? A level of service is the expectation that I have for this new relationship model. And then, when you get from like, okay, we've signed a contract, we're in the network, we're operating in a collaborative manner, the things that often aren't associated today with a network organization that I think are lying under the surface, and it doesn't even have to be like immediate touch points in person, are things like, are we evaluating their experience? That can be done through surveys. It can be done through any type of technology that they engage in with our organization. It can be done through the publication of newsletters and policies to make sure that they're informed. But there's also the aspects of a network organization that touch even things like their care delivery visits. So when they're in the room with a patient, most folks don't think about the way that a network organization impacts that visit, that even sitting in the office, a patient and a provider, where does the network fit there? And where it fits is, often networks and the tools that we have include portals and applications that providers access during a care visit with a provider. And those could be anything from clinical decision support tools to prior authorization access in room, to understanding preferred networks that are available when they refer for services like lab or DME, ability to access value-based tools in real time when they're meeting with their patients that could potentially close gaps in care. And so these communication channels, these technologies that get deployed inside of a provider's workflow that enable them to better deliver that care are network functions. And so they're often overlooked, I think, when people are like, what does a network team do? They think, well, we credential, we provide manage provider data, and we negotiate contracts. But there's all of these other layers in the work that a chief network officer's team could do. And again, it's very circular, because once you've done all of those things, it starts right back over. You have to get re-credentialed, you have to recontract, you have to continue to provide care. So I think if we start thinking strategically about how a network organization could be structured to support all of those different layers in the journey, I think you have a more robust outcome for not only providers, but also for the customers in which they serve.
I think that's a wonderful vision of the provider landscape and the provider journey. And something that you even said early on is right, it even starts way before they're even engaged with your organization with awareness. That's really sticking with me. And that's something
Yeah.
I'll be thinking about. It's almost a brand awareness, right? Challenge. It's really, really good observation. So what I'd like to do now is I think we have time for at least a couple of questions. We actually had one pop in the chat, which I'd like to hit first. So the question in the chat, we touched a bit of a nerve on provider data. We've got a couple of questions related to that. So this is someone saying, I feel like I can hold my own organization accountable to getting our data updated, to getting quality data, but it's really hard when I'm dependent on people outside of my organization, when I'm dependent on providers to get me that data. So any thoughts or tips either from Keely or Rob or Jeff? You're allowed to answer this one too if you want, Jeff. How do you try to get that data you need when you're really dependent on someone outside of your organization to provide it to you or to make sense of it?
I can, so that's the challenge, right? It's because at the end of the day, the providers are the ultimate source of truth, for this. So, I think it's important, to the best of your abilities, to develop good relationships within the markets and the markets that you're working with and with those provider groups. And as we were kind of talking about, having provider performance, a provider engagement model where you're making those routine contacts and you're developing those relationships and you're able to, lean on them to get that data, because they are ultimately, at the end of the day, they're going to be your best source to getting accurate and timely data, or making those corrections where it's not always going to be correct. But completely agree, that is the pain point that ultimately we are trying to control some information or data that we don't ultimately control.
Yeah,
Great.
I'll just add to that. I think, the key is it's continual contact. And it's honestly, if we're the provider data challenge is not singular for any single one of our organizations. And I think I mentioned this when we were first talking about it. It's a global healthcare industry challenge that needs to be solved. But at the end of the day, the relationships that we have within our organizations, outside of our organizations, into the industry are absolutely critical for all of us in solving this problem. If I have continual touch points with my providers and my payer partners where we can continually data share amongst each other in a way that is open and transparent, we can collectively all solve this. But if we are closed doors and operating in the siloed environment that has historically been present, we won't solve for it. So I think that the engagement amongst organizations between provider, payer, third-party vendors that are tackling this through technology solutions, that transparent open lines of communication is what's going to best serve everyone.
Yeah, agreed. We have another question coming in on someone, which I think we can probably relate with this challenge or pressure. Someone saying, wanting to know, how do you guys balance the need to do the kind of innovation we're talking about, to push strategy forward, and really balance that with all of the demands around regulatory compliance, data governance? Feel like you're just trying to keep up with changes. One thing I'll observe too, and then I'll hand it over to the experts for thoughts and opinions. There was a while in my career where I was working on the quality side, so helping folks improve star measures, HEDIS measures, things like that. And I'll say we heard and saw a lot of the same phenomenon. People refer it to as measure chasing. You can feel like you're really chasing the ball, right? And you're behind the ball rather than moving to where the ball's going on the field. And you feel like you're just trying to keep up with sort of the rules and the measures. And so a lot of organizations in the quality space, and I know we're talking about, how do we move from measure chasing to being truly more proactive about quality? So I'm curious, both Rob and Keely, because you both certainly talked about being able to make time for innovative things. How do you do that and still balance the need to keep compliant, to keep regulatory, to keep operating?
So, I think it's something I obviously someone pointed out. It's a struggle for all of us, right? So there's a number of, there's no lack of opportunity within managed care organizations. So every day, there's like 10 or 15 things coming at me from different direction, whether it's value-based contracting models, whether it's quality, risk adjustment. And so I think it's important, that you have, good leadership. And that's why, again, where this chief network officer comes into play is you have to be able to prioritize those initiatives and kind of sequence them in and figure out, okay, well, here's my year. Here's the calendar year 2025. Here's what I can fit in this year. I'd love to be able to fit in everything, but I can't. So where are we going to prioritize that? And you need to work, collaboratively, cross-functionally within your organization, your leadership, to determine what those items are going to be. But it is, it is a struggle and a challenge because, we are in this society of like, there is so much data, so much information, and so many opportunities coming in from every direction. But at some point you kind of have to draw the line and say, all right, here's what I'm gonna work on. I know I had someone said, you can't do 10 things until you do one thing. So I need to start with, all right, what am I going to do first? What am I going to do second? Really step back. So I often find myself stepping back and like, all right, what am I doing? What am I working on? And are those the right things that I should be working on at this time? Or do I have the right focus? Or am I getting lost in these kind of rabbit holes, which is very easy to do because we are, because the network team, I say this to my team, we touch every part of the organization, right? So I have like a little center bubble where network is included in the middle and all the different areas that network touch. And again, at the end, you have to kind of be able to prioritize and work with leadership to say, all right, here's what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to approach it. But it is a challenge, and sometimes those priorities do shift, and we have to be able to pivot and be agile even during and throughout the course of the year.
Makes sense. Keely, any last thoughts from you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say defining clear goals, and those goals can shift, but when we talk about goals, oftentimes when we set goals, they're pretty generic or they're global. They're for our organization, and you need to spend a lot of time taking goals and drilling them down so that they are specific, so that they're measurable. Because what gets tracked and measured gets done. But the third component that is often missed is, are they achievable? Mm-hmm. Because if a goal that is set is not achievable, the motivation to drive towards that goal, even if it is specific and measurable, if it's unachievable, your team knows it's unachievable out of the gate, the motivation to achieve the goal isn't there, right? Mm-hmm. So that level setting or that right sizing of, can I actually get this done, is super, super important, especially in the environment where we are trying to manage speed and quality. So yeah, goal setting, I think, is absolutely critical.
I love that. I love that empathy for the team. That's great. This was a wonderful first session. Thank you all for attending. It was really, really fun for me to be part of the conversation. And I even kind of knew it was coming because obviously I had prepared some of the questions and it was still learn new things. It was still really exciting for me. For our audience, just know if there are questions that we didn't get to, we will follow up with you via email. If you have any additional questions for the team, please get in touch with our marketing team. That's marketing@andros.co. They are the hosts of this great event, so you can get in touch with them. We will have a recording of this session as well as an article recap. That will be available on the Andros website, so please check out andros.co by the end of this week. You can revisit that content. You can certainly forward it to colleagues if you think there are important things here that you want the rest of your organization to be aware of. please, before you sign off today, just take a quick second and take that exit survey. It'll give us feedback on how this session went. We'll take your feedback into consideration, bring it into future sessions. And then again, please do come back every Tuesday this month. Our next session is on May 13th at 11 a.m., same time. That will be the provider perspective. So we'll be hearing from some providers about what they need from networks. So thank you for joining the first section, and we will see you next week. Take care.
Thank you.
Hi all.
Thank you.
Nice job.